macrophage. Imagine you wake up one day and you have a throbbing pain inside your skull. Slowly, you reach for a thermometer or any other device to measure your temperature. Turns out you have a fever, and we're going to learn about how really your body defends yourself and what the immune system is. Now, here is actually a book, a very intricate book on this subject, Immune, a journey into the mysterious system that keeps you alive. This book was actually written by Philip Detmer. Now, this is a very intricate system, and in fact, it is so complex that it is the second most complex system apart from our nervous system. It's going to take a lot of time, and we can't cover it inside a video. We're going to talk about this in a whole series of videos, at least 10 videos at the very least. Now, for evolution, we talk about it in one of my first videos, also known as the Tree of Life, and for more information you can search that later after this video. Basically, the Tree of Life is made by Charles Darwin, a natural biologist who made it by seeing the patterns of life. Basically talking about how life evolved from one point to another point. The power of evolution. Billions of years from now, Earth was born, but not like our sweet heaven like now. However, as a hot volcanic hell, spewing gases and making life practically impossible to thrive. Millions of years later, the first unicellular organisms were created. And how did they do that? Well, again, evolution. They evolved. However, evolution, as I said in my first video, very, very slow. However, thousands of years later, they began to evolve into chemical warfare. They slowly evolved weapons, but not like guns like now. They used small weapons such as chemicals, acids, and others to devour them. They developed weapons. Another million years later, multicellular organisms arrived and rose. In order to survive and protect themselves from another organism such as bacterium and others, and maybe archaea, the immune system was born, along with lots of other systems, including the complement system and the lymphatic system. Now, these systems we will not talk about today. Each of them deserve their own whole video because they are very, very complex. Now, we're going to look at this and give an analysis. First of all, two words we first look at: unicellular and multicellular organisms. What are they really? Well, as I talked in my Tree of Life video, there are different types of organisms. For example, the bacteria. All bacteria or bacterium are unicellular or one single celled. Uni is basically one, and cell is the basic of life, smallest unit of life. So, they only have a single cell. That's how they live, bacteria. However, unicellular. Now, how did they, multicellular, how did they even began in the first place? Now, before eukarya, or like a eukarya are basically another domain of life, basically we evolved from bacteria and archaea. These are also two domains of life. Archaea and bacteria are basically cousins. But what separates them far from them is archaea can withstand the hardest of pressures, the most extreme of environments. Well, basically, one day, by pure chance and pure evolution, they merged together. And slowly, the bacteria and archaea grew and grew and grew. And evolution took them to another stage. The multicellular organisms rose. But it took another million and a million and a million and a million years till they actually evolved into complex things, like tapeworms. Now, this may not sound like complex, but they're already very, very detailed. They have a nervous system and they have a body. Great. But it would take a lot of time before we, Homo sapiens, grew. Now, we're going to take a look at the cell structure and bacterium structure in order to understand what is the immune system. Well, first of all, the immune system is not like our heart. It basically had some organs like the lymph nodes and others, but basically it's just made up of an army of cells, each armed with biological and chemical warfare weapons. Now, we're going to take a look at the cell structure in these two diagrams. This is a more focused diagram, but we're just going to focus on the main parts, each by each. First of all, the cell membrane. The cell membrane is the most outer part of the cell, as you see here, and this only the animal cell. Plant cells also have a cell wall, but we're not going to talk about this today. The cell membrane is basically semi-permeable, which means that it allows selectively, basically it allows only a few types of matters to go inside. For example, oxygen and other resources that the cell needs. It's also very flexible. So this is why we humans and other animals are able to flex our fingers. Plants have a rigid cell wall, which means that they can't actually move. So this is why when you touch a tree, it's almost impossible to bend it like a human. Now we enter the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is basically a gel-like substance consisting of proteins and what's not inside the cell, including the garbage and waste. It's basically like a gel-like substance that holds the cell together. Imagine if it was a tent. It would be the stilts of the tent or the cell. Now here we enter to the organelles. The organelles are basically the organs of a cell. The ribosome, the vacuole, the mitochondrion, and nucleus, and a bunch of other or not. The mitochondrion is basically the cell energy production. It produces energy for the cell, so allowing it to thrive. Now, the vacuole and the ribosome. The vacuole is basically like a garbage can. Basically, it stores nutrients and water, making it a very important garbage can inside the cell. Now, the ribosome. The ribosome is the protein factory of the cell. The ribosome is basically the protein factory of the cell. The nucleus, which is very important of the cell, gives out instructions to them. After giving instructions to the ribosome of which proteins to make, it produces them by using amino acids and other what's not. Now they produce it, but they can also recycle and store in the vacuole. Now finally, the nucleus and the nucleolus. These are the most important parts of the cell, including our DNA and RNA, and lots of others. DNA and RNA is basically the cell map. It provides the whole instruction of how to build a cell. Provides what makes a cell a cell. And the DNA is also very unique too. The DNA is what makes us us, what we call genes. Every different organisms has a different gene and also have a different DNA. It is impossible to be almost exactly the same. Now, we'll move on to the bacterial structure. Now, this favors E. coyle. This bacterial structure is the basic structure of E. coyle. E. coyle is a stomach bacterium that makes us have diarrhea and stomach aches. Very bad for us. And very common too. Now, we can actually see a few differences right now here. We can see lots and lots of cosines. coating around the bacteria. We can also see a long hairy-like structure. Now, here we have the cell wall. Now, the cell wall is also not like a cell membrane, but also very similar, made of the same thing, in fact. And these others are most overlapping. The capsule, the plasma membrane, and lots of others. They are just casings. Some even have an envelope. This is basically protecting them from the outside harms. Same way we have our skin. Now, here they actually only have a few organelles, including the plasmid and the ribosome. Now, the ribosome, as we talked about, is basically the protein factory. Obviously, this is important. The plasmid is also a small organelle. The plasmid is basically to fend off intruders. Because, well, basically bacteria are unicellular, right? They live only by themselves, so they still have their very tiny and mini immune system. Finally, the DNA. The DNA provides them their gene code. And unlike ours, which is encoded in the nucleus, most of the time they're just floating around in strands. And here, this, as we can see here, is the flagella. The flagella is like a long hairy-like structure. It is also found in the sperm cell, which carries our male code to the female egg cell to produce a new baby or fetus. Now here, the flagella is basically to also have the same function of the sperm cell, to move around. Now we're going to talk about what exactly is the immune system. The immune system, along with the complement system and lymphatic system, is the second most complex system inside your body. What basically it does is to fend off intruders and also to protect you from outside harms and clean up your body. Now, here, we're going to talk about why is it so important. Now, here, this is you, a cell. Now imagine every cell is human, okay? The size comparison of you. If you're a cell, basically 20 to 30 Mount Everest is your height. Here. That's exactly why if we want to live, the immune system is here. They help us by protecting us. Here, we have some key figures. A macrophage, the dendritic cell, the neutrophil, the complement system, the eosinophil, the mast cell, the natural killer T cell, the B cell, the T cell, and more. Now, there are actually two different types of the immune system. The first one is the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. However, we're not going to specify here. But in a nutshell, the innate immune system is to deal with any kind of intruders. You don't have to specify on who they face. So, if a random bacteria, for example E. coli, turns up, any of the innate system can destroy them, the macrophage. And now, the adaptive immune system. As you can see here, the adaptive means is adapted to the environment and also to the bacterium. Now, this is where it gets actually very, very interesting. The immune system holds an entire library of every possible combinations of future and even prehistoric times that invaders or pathogens gene codes, and has a specific cell to fend them off. Now this is actually very interesting because how can we have every possible pathogen and even future pathogens in our body? This is very hard to explain, so we're going to talk about it in future episodes. Now, these are just some main players as we listed here, but there are more. And finally, the invaders. These are just 6 common types of invaders. Bacteria, as we just said, is basically unicellular organisms. So is protists and fungi. Now, what makes virus special is that they're neither living or actually not living. Scientists are still debating whether a virus is alive or actually dead. They have some characteristics, but sometimes they don't. Now, finally, cancer and parasites. First of all, parasites. Parasites can mean anything. We can even say a bacteria is a parasite. However, here in biological terms, a parasite can mean, for example, multicellular organisms, such as tapeworms and others. Finally, cancer. Cancer is civil war against your own body. Cancer can be caused by radiation and also genetic mutations. It can be caused by anything. Kills millions every year and is a very huge problem these days. It's basically your body going on civil war to yourself. It can cause blood clots, liver failure, brain clots, and more. Today we talk about what is the immune system, a basic introduction, the power of evolution, the cell and bacterium structure, and the key figures and the makers. In the following videos, we're going to talk about lots of other things. For example, what happens when you step on a rusty nail? And also, what are the functions of these cells? How does the complement system work? What is cancer? And how can you defend yourself from it? And more.